Well, hello and welcome to the Movie Paradise. I'm your host, Nathaniel Molnar. I'm joined by Rob Giganto, special guest host. Thanks for being here, Rob.
No problem.
And we are talking to a very special guest today. He is the writer and director of the new Happy Death Day 2U film, Chris Landon. Thanks for being here.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, guys.
No problem.
Yeah, so we had a chance to go see the film yesterday. Before we get into this interview, I just want to say we both loved the movie. So Rob, you saw Happy Death Day 1 when it came out, right?
Yes, I did. I saw it with my family. We went to the movie theater, and I wasn't really sure what to expect. I hadn't seen many trailers, but it looked like it could be fun, and I really enjoyed it, and I recommend it to someone like Nathaniel.
Ever since it came out, you've been raving about this movie.
I just find it to be a lot of fun, and I think it's a good movie for everybody to watch, I think. It's got a little bit of everything for everybody.
Nice.
Yeah, and I had not seen it. Honestly, I watched the first one for the first time yesterday, right before we saw the new one. So I didn't know what to expect other than Rob's rave recommendation, and I loved it. I thought it was great. And to be completely honest, I liked the new one even more.
Oh.
I really loved this new one. I really was impressed with it. So first of all, great job, Chris, with the film. So with this new one, the first Happy Death Day you directed, but you did not write the script. With this new Happy Death Day, you are both writing and directing. So I'm curious, how is your approach to this sequel different when you're writing and directing it as opposed to just directing the first one?
Well, I mean, look, first of all, I'm not supposed to talk about it, at any great detail, and I never would want to take away from the amazing contributions of Scott Lobedell, who wrote the first movie.
Absolutely.
But I was hired to rewrite the first movie. That's how I became involved with the project. So even though I'm not credited, I made a fairly significant contribution to that script. So it wasn't like it was a new thing for me to jump into that particular role, because I had done it on the first movie as well. So it felt pretty comfortable. It was very old hat for me, since I had been with that first story for quite a long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So you said you did an unofficial rewrite on the first film. Would you say that there are elements, and you said you can't comment too much on it, and I understand that.
The WGA policy, once they've determined a credit, they don't like people talking about it. It's just sort of a guild policy thing. I mean, all I can say is, I mean, I actually wrote 7 drafts of.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's just a tricky system, and at the end of the day, it's a system that's ultimately, rightfully so, designed to protect the original writer of a film. Because they don't want, people coming in and sort of making sort of cursory changes and then trying to take credit away from other people. So it's a bit of a tricky number. But like I said, I was very deeply involved in the first movie from that perspective. But ultimately it was Scott that got sole credit for that work.
So my question then, going back to the first one, is I had read online that the script that Scott wrote for the first film, it was around as early as like 2007. At what point in the process were you brought on for that first film?
2007.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'll give you the quick backstory. So, the script was out there, and the studio at the time was entertaining the idea of making it, but they didn't feel that the script was where it needed to be. So I was hired to rewrite it. And they hired they eventually had hired another director. It was a music video director, who was going to make the movie. And then, something happened. It's just sort of, they got cold feet. And then I think that particular division of Universal closed. It was called Rogue. And so Rogue closed, and then the script kind of just sat on a shelf forever. then I obviously went off and was doing other stuff. I worked on a TV show for a while. I was writing the paranormal movies and whatnot. And then I was having lunch with the producer, and the script came up. And I said, it's such a bummer because I really loved that script, and I think it would be such a cool movie. And then all of a sudden this light bulb turned on, and I said, you know what, I got to call Jason Blum because his deal is at Universal. So I called Jason Blum and I said, I think I have something cool for you. And I sent it over to him. And then, I think the very next day he called me, and he said, we're making this. And then,
wow.
And then and after it sat for years and years and years collecting dust, we flew into production.
So at what point was this? The film came out in 2017. So was this like 2016-ish?
This was closer to, no, it was 2015.
Okay.
We made the movie very quickly, but then the studio decided to hold the movie until Halloween. They really wanted to go after this Friday the 13th release date. That was in October, which I think was a really smart choice.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So the movie kind of hung out for probably about like 6 months finished.
Wow.
Before it was ultimately released.
Wow. So you did a few drafts on that first one. You directed the film. I am curious the character of Tree, played by Jessica Roth.
Mm-hmm.
The character, there's a lot to the character that is brought to life by the performance.
Yes.
A lot of how the character is made, and really I believe these films hinge on you buying into her character and you getting behind her. Mm-hmm. And then especially when we get into the second film, when a lot of things start happening that are rather kind of crazy and out of the box, they mean something because you care about this character and you care about what is happening to her and the other characters surrounding her.
Right.
So my question to you would be, how much of that character was defined from the script, and then how much of it was you working with Jessica Roth to find the right character and find the right tone for her?
I mean, I think it's all of the above, and I would say that in equal measures. One thing that I thought was really important, when I approached the first movie, it was key for me that she really had this very specific and clearly defined arc. And so it was critical that at the beginning of the movie, she was a pretty despicable person, right? She's having an affair with a married man. She's abusive to her friends. She's dismissive of others. But I also wanted to make sure that there were little hints dropped in there, that there was some personal stuff going on for her that kind of made her this way. And then as she sort of begins to, face the time loop and really gets a good hard look at herself, she begins to change. And part of that change, which is a very emotional kind of journey for her. But it was really critical for me to make sure that there was a lot of humor. Because I think that that's a very endearing quality in a person. When all of my very close friends are really funny people. And there was just something about Jessica when I first met her, where she just embodied all of the qualities that I was looking for in an actor. She was smart and funny and but a very real person. And there was just this sort of really beautiful quality to her that I thought was such a perfect match. And so when Jess and I we did a lot of rehearsing. I like to do a ton of rehearsals whenever I make a film. As much as I'm allowed to do within the sort of short time frame that we get. And so it was a big part of it was Jess and I getting together and really kind of digging in and kind of sort of finding a lot of the nuance of the character. And then even while we were shooting, we would discover things. There's this scene in the first movie where and it was one of the bigger laughs that we had in the first movie when she wakes up. I don't know, it might be like the fifth or sixth time, and Carter starts to speak and she shouts silence and like she does this like very crazy. That was a moment on the day that was like a third or fourth take where I suddenly, that idea kind of popped into my brain and I said, oh my God, try this. And that was the joy of working with her, was there was so much discovery along the way. Some of my favorite lines in the movie, she has a really awesome, really shitty diss to Tim, the guy that keeps popping out from behind the pillar during her walk of shame, and she makes a subway joke about him not having a foot long, and that was Jess totally doing that on the fly, like during take. Like, it wasn't discussed, it wasn't rehearsed. She pulled that one out, and it was one of those moments where I had to like bite my hand while we were rolling because I was cracking up. So that was the real fun of working with Jess, is that she's super collaborative. We have crazy chemistry in terms of feeling very much in sync. And so our kind of joint vision of who this character was, I think, helped the movie in a pretty significant way, and then ultimately sort of helped pave a really solid foundation for the second one. I felt like I could ask her to do more because of the relationship that we had from the first movie.
Would you say there was a lot of more improv maybe on the second movie than there was in the first one, just because of your guys' relationship?
You know, I wouldn't say there was more, just because, you know, when you're making a movie for Jason Blum, you know, one of the things that you sign up for is the fact that you're making something at a lower budget level. And so it's not like we ever had tons of time to kind of like fuck around and improv and do lots of crazy stuff. It's just, you just can't pull that off with the schedule that we have. So, I mean, we stuck fairly close to the script, but there's still wiggle room in there to experiment and play with some stuff in terms of improvising a bit. And I always try to give actors as much of that as I can. And if they have ideas, I'm always all ears about it. But we did have to we were sticking to the script pretty closely for the most part.
How long was the shoot schedule for both films, I would ask?
The first film I had, it was a 25-day shoot. The second film, I believe we had a 29-day shoot. So they were both pretty, you know, in the grand scheme of things, you know, very, very tight schedules.
You mentioned that when working with Jason Blum and Blumhouse, that you're kept to a pretty tight budget, which seems to be their method of success.
Right.
Is putting out low budget films, and then they get a large intake back at the box office. Would you say when you're working with this lower budget, was there a push and a back and forth with Blumhouse at all? Like, there was something you wanted to do, but you couldn't get the right budget for it? Or were there go-arounds that you had to do to kind of keep with the vision that you had for the film, but adhering to this budget that was given to you?
Right. I mean, I'll say this. I mean, the beauty of working with Jason and with that company is that, I mean, they really genuinely support their filmmakers. And so they really truly let you make the movie that you want to make. Like, they don't hover over you on set and tell you what to do. All of the notes that I ever received from them were purely take it or leave it notes. If you agreed with them, I would execute them, and if I didn't have to do them. But again, it all comes back to as long as you stay within budget. And so sometimes I had to go in there and kind of cut stuff out. There were deaths that I wanted to shoot that were too big or too expensive. So those had to go, or I had to change them. And, you know, sometimes, I mean, I would say on a daily basis, I had to cut my shot list down because it was too ambitious. And so those are the kind of things that you just have to kind of stomach and deal with, because that's the agreement that you've made with them, and you can't go over budget because there is no money left. No one's going to come in and bail you out, you know, if you go way over. So that's the responsibility that I had as a filmmaker. But it also kind of, in many ways, can creatively force you to be a bit more nimble. And we would find some pretty fun things that we could do because of those constraints. So I think I'm grateful that I've been able to work in a low budget space, because I think you can't hide behind stuff. You can't hide behind tons of visual effects, and you can't hide behind all those things. You really have to kind of lean into story and character to try and convince people that you're making a good movie.
In the second one, there's a montage sequence where you get to see all these different deaths. Now, I was wondering what the thought process was in coming up with those different deaths, and were there some? Could you tell us maybe some of the deaths that didn't make the movie that you guys wanted to do?
Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty funny and fucked up thing to do, because not only it wasn't just me. Like, I encouraged. I actually had a contest when we were in pre-production with my crew and my actors, and it was like, come up with a funny death day, like it was. I really opened it up. I was like, if anybody has a really funny death in their brain, please come share it with me. And I know I was constantly like, whenever I was driving around or walking around, if I saw something, I'd be like, oh, that's awesome, and I would scribble it down in a notebook. But it was a lot of fun. First of all, getting to shoot all the elements for that sequence. It really was. It was because it was designed to be sort of like this companion to the montage in the first movie. Where in the first movie, she has a murder montage.
Yep.
In this one, we called it the reset montage, where she sort of was like, screw it, I'm not going to let some killer sort of take away my power. So she was in charge of her own destiny there. There was one really funny death that I was super bummed that we couldn't do because it was going to interrupt the middle of the montage, and we ended up going with a version of this anyway with the skydiving bit. But there was going to be a bit where we cut to, the music would stop and we would cut to Tree sitting in a car, and she's reading her her journal where she's keeping all of her notes, and the Carpenters was going to be playing on the radio, Close to You. And the car starts kind of getting smaller, and she's like kind of scrunching the book closer and closer until we realize that she's in one of those car crushers. Oh. And she's literally slowly being smashed to death. And so it was going to be this really funny, gruesome bit, but it was so complicated and expensive that there was no way I could actually do it. So that one got cut. There was also another one where she dives into a big she goes to an aquarium and dives into a great white shark exhibit thing, and she gets eaten. So there was that one too. But I think what we ended up with still felt ultimately effective.
Yep.
Yeah, that whole sequence of the movie, I thought that was awesome. I loved that, especially like I don't want to give too. I do want to do a portion of this interview that's spoilers, but I want to keep this first half spoiler free. But there's the one with the wood chipper. that one was excellent, and like you mentioned, the skydiving one, that was probably my favorite. I absolutely loved that one.
Yeah, it's a really what's super tricky about these movies is that they're PG-13, so I have to be super calculated and careful about how far I can push it. So it was always trying to find the balance that made something funny and kind of gross, but not too gross or too dark. It kind of took you out of the movie. So it was always the balance of it all was always a bit of a challenge.
Would you say, was there ever a point in time where these movies were supposed to be rated R, or were they always planned as PG-13? There was a version early on, and in one of my earlier drafts, I did write a very hard R version where her deaths were insanely violent. They were super gory and over the top. And it's an interesting thing because I know there are a lot of horror fans out there that really would have appreciated that version of the movie. But ultimately what we found as we were kind of pressing forward was that we didn't feel like the movie benefited from it. You know what I mean? Like there's certain films, like I don't want to go see, like a new Halloween, that's PG-13. Like I'm in it I want to see Michael Myers, really brutally murdering people. So I appreciate gore. Like no one wants to see Saw and see PG-13 Saw, right? Yeah.
So there are certain kinds of movies that just absolutely require gore, but this was a movie that that had such kind of a lightness and tone and a sweetness to it, that it felt like it almost betrayed the ultimate spirit of the movie by being gory and being uber violent, because it kind of, it took the, especially because we're dealing with a young woman who's trying to solve her own murder and is dying over and over again. I didn't want it to feel gratuitous. So that's why ultimately we all collectively agreed to go for a PG-13 rating on this movie. It wasn't like a studio mandate, like you have to do it this way. We all just felt like it was the right thing to do for the movie.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that the PG-13 rating really helps with that. And especially, I think it definitely goes to what you're saying about the tone of the movie. And we see this definitely upped in the second one. In the first one, we have, like, half of the movie is kind of horror, and then the second half really starts getting into this lighter, more comedic tone, and then the second one really just goes full in on that tone.
Yeah.
And I loved that the second one really just fully embraced it. And was that always something, like, when you were directing the first Happy Death Day and doing the subsequent rewrites of the script, and you were balancing this horror tone with this comedic tone, was it always intended that you wanted to kind of fully explore the comedic tone in the sequel? Was that something, like, you became attached to when making the first one?
I mean, look, I've always loved blending those elements. I love horror comedies. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but it's mine. It's definitely my jam. So it's a big thing for me. What was interesting about making the two movies was, on the first movie, like, there was an opportunity to be more of a horror movie because we were dealing with, it was a slasher film, and we had a killer who was aggressively pursuing their victim, and so it was easy for me to lean into the horror elements of that. What I discovered and decided when I approached the second movie was that, if I was going to try to make a movie that felt different and fresh and not like some sort of retread, I was gonna have to shift it up a bit in a pretty significant way, because I knew that I couldn't make the same movie twice. It just wasn't going to work. We had seen her, go through all of these motions and watch her sort of be in a loop, and I didn't want to watch a new character go through that. Like, it's funny, the first part, again, without giving anything away, the first act, or the first 20 minutes or so of the new one, I actually intentionally misled the audience into believing that was the movie that they were going to be watching. And then I obviously flip it, because I wanted to kind of wink and nod at everybody, but it was also like a baton handoff. Like the first 20 minutes of that movie is more reminiscent of the first movie. And then I stop. I hit the brakes and I say, no, we're gonna turn now. So it was critical for me to not. I had to slightly, not even just slightly, I had to really change gears and change the genre a bit in order to, what I felt like was to ultimately successfully move on.
I found it interesting that we got to see, I forget what the character's name is with the blonde hair, but it was cool because watching the first movie, I always thought to myself, it would be cool to see where these other characters, what their day was like that same day. And do you think there's a possibility where we could, maybe if there was another movie where, like a third Happy Death Day, where we could see where some of the other characters were that day, or even maybe the day before, the 18th, maybe the 17th?
Right. Well, I mean, I think the sad, heartbreaking news, at least for me right now, is that based on our opening weekend, I highly doubt there's ever going to be a third.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
oh,
we had a rough.
I didn't look at the box office numbers. I haven't checked it.
We had a rough weekend, unfortunately.
There was a lot of movies that came out this week.
Yeah, it was a busy weekend, and I think honestly, it's funny. Like, for better or for worse, the campaign that was built for this movie was sort of like promising people kind of the same style of movie, and everybody felt like it was in everyone's best interest to withhold the sci-fi element of the sequel, and I think that maybe wasn't the best decision in the end, because I don't think anybody out there really knew that we were actually going to do something truly different, and so it may have ultimately it made people maybe feel like, well, we saw that movie, why do I need to go see it again? So anyways, I do have an idea for the third movie, because I kind of wanted this to be a trilogy, and I had a truly batshit idea for the third one, which again, if people thought this was if this was a curveball for people, then the third one was going to be another one.
Wow.
And I'd pitched it to Jason a few weeks before this one opened, and it was the same kind of thing, same reaction he had the second time, which was that's crazy and ridiculous, and you should probably try to do that. But alas, it probably won't happen unless we pull like a John Wick, and the movie does so well, aftermarket that we have a reason to go back. I wish we could. I love working with these people too. I love working with Jessica, and not just her, our whole cast and our crew. We're all a bit of a family now, so it's a bit of a bummer for me to not have a good weekend.
What was the first thing I said as soon as the second one ended? I said, I'm all on board for the third one.
Yes.
I could not wait for the third one.
Would the third one, I know there was kind of like a mid whatever after credits scene.
Without going into what it is.
Would the third one, like, would it take that, or would it go in a new direction?
No, that was very much connected to the idea for part 3.
Okay.
Yeah, but again, like, it was one of those. I'll say this: the idea that I have for the third one really was born out of me sitting in the editing room, and then realizing that there was a certain kind of time loop movie that nobody has done yet, and I couldn't believe that it hasn't been done yet, since I feel like there are literally dozens and dozens of time loop movies out there now. But nobody had done this particular idea with it yet, so I got super excited about the prospects of that. But again,
Yeah, I mean,
happening.
Here's hoping that in the long run it does really well and it earns that money, because the film definitely deserves it. So you mentioned that there were tons and tons of time travel movies. I'm curious. Obviously, the films directly mention, in a tongue-in-cheek way, other movies like Groundhog Day and Back to the Future. I'm curious, like, maybe in addition to those, what are some other movies that were direct influences for both the Happy Death Day movies?
There were a ton. It's so funny too, because a lot of people ask me outside of the obvious, which is Groundhog Day, but people have said, "Oh, what other time loop movies were you watching?" And the answer to that was none. I avoided them like the plague. I actually did not watch Groundhog Day again. I avoided that movie as well, because I didn't want it to sort of influence my process and what I was trying to do with both movies. But I will say that I think Wes Craven's influence is keenly felt in the first movie. I was a huge fan of that series. I love Scream 1 and 2. So those were big influences. I tend to return to the well of John Hughes. There's a very, very, very specific and notable scene in Happy Death Day, the first one, that is a total John Hughes callback, which is there's a scene with Tree and Carter where she's it's toward the end of the movie and she's blowing out her cupcake. It's right before she eats it. That was my homage to 16 Candles. So John Hughes is another one, but it's funny, on the second movie I had other influences. I went back to movies that I loved from when I was a kid, like Weird Science, Real Genius. I I even had a little rando touch of terms of endearment. So there were different influences abound on all of these movies. I'm a huge movie fanatic. I think I'm sure most directors are, but like Carter's dorm room is populated with posters of movies that are all favorites of mine. And it ended up being kind of random. It's almost like kismet that I had put up a Back to the Future poster in his dorm room. It's the poster that's right behind Tree every time she wakes up in the first movie, and not knowing that I was going to go in a very Back to the Future kind of direction with the second movie.
Wow, that's really interesting.
In this second one, I noticed, I think it was like a landscaping truck or whatever, had the name like Biff's Company.
Yeah.
Was that you that put that in there? Because I thought I noticed that right away.
There are some really fun Back to the Future Easter eggs that are in the second movie. That's one of them for sure. If you can freeze frame, there's a homeless guy, that pops up behind a bush.
In the beginning.
If anyone actually is able to freeze frame it and read the sign he's holding, it actually says "will work for flux capacitor."
That's awesome.
And then there's one other Back to the Future Easter egg that's tucked into the movie that I'm actually not allowed to talk about for
that's completely fine.
Complex legal reasons. But I snuck one that's really awesome that only the most hardcore fan would ever get. But yeah, I love those movies. I love Robert Zemeckis. I'm such a huge fan of his work, and it was really cool to be able to dabble in that arena.
Now, can you help settle a personal debate between us?
Okay.
Which one do you prefer? Back to the Future 1 or Back to the Future 2?
See, this is I'm the wrong guy to ask because I have so much appreciation and respect for both of them. From a pure entertainment and enjoyment level, I would say 1. But from a complexity storytelling perspective, I would say 2. I think they
right down the middle.
They both, and by the way, I think people who maybe a lot of people who watch, these movies will say the same thing. I think some people will always kind of have an allegiance to the first movie, also just because it was the first, so it felt fresh and brand new. While some others might kind of feel that the second one is such a fun companion that it's a tough one. I can't settle that dispute between you guys. Sorry, I suck.
That's okay.
Yeah.
I was also wondering. I don't know if I also kind of was thinking of Gremlins 2 in a way when I was watching this one, which that movie is so different than the first Gremlins.
And it's so batshit.
Yeah.
I think in the spirit of it being different and crazy, I think they are what I think is kind of what's different about this movie than I think a lot of other ones is that, and I think it's funny. It's much, much, much more appreciated when you have the opportunity to watch them closer together. Because a lot of the stuff that I did here gets lost in sort of the distance between viewings. And so I think that if people can watch them back to back, and we actually proposed, and I think they're going to do it, they're going to, at least on DVD, they're going to create a supercut. There won't be any. So they'll just kind of pick up, where the other one ends, and because there's a lot of crazy stuff going on here. I mean, apart from just big kind of obvious stuff, with the changes in the dimensions, there's actual footage, which I don't think anyone's ever really done before. There's footage in the second movie that's lifted directly from the first because the scenes were so seamless. I was actually able to use shots from the first movie and put them in the second one, and not as flashbacks. I mean, just telling the second story.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, that reminds me, I don't know if you had a chance to see the other Blumhouse movie, Glass, that just recently came out, but they did a similar thing with that, too, where they took clips from Unbreakable and put them in the
It was a deleted scene from Unbreakable, though.
I thought that was really cool.
Yeah. It's fun. It was cool getting to, revisit the first movie in such a specific way.
Yeah, and I'd say, I know for us, we watched the first one yesterday, and then like as soon as it was over, we drove to the theater to go see the second one. So when we were watching them, especially me seeing it for the first time, we definitely had that experience of one right into the next. I could definitely see they flow. They're such great companion pieces. They work so well together, and they flow from one right into the next.
But then we also had someone who came with us that had not seen the first one.
Oh wow!
And just went right into the second one.
That was on.
I tried to tell him, like, you probably should have watched the first one before.
Yeah.
But he seemed to enjoy it too.
Yeah, I mean, you could. When we had our first test screening, we definitely invited people who had not seen the first movie, just because we needed to make sure that like people wouldn't be completely lost. And I think there was a certain they enjoyed the movie, but yeah, I mean, I don't think you can. It's definitely not even close to the same experience.
If we want to get into some spoilers for the new one,
yeah.
So anyone listening who has not seen Happy Death Day 2U, don't listen to this part from here on, because we're going to be talking about spoilers about the new one. So, one of the things that I really loved about this new one is exploring the Tree's relationship with her mother.
Mm-hmm.
I thought that was a great thing, because in the first movie, she doesn't have any relationship with her mother. Her mother has passed away, and then in the new one, she enters this alternate dimension, and then suddenly her mother is there. But then she doesn't have memories with her mother, and so there's this moral debate with Tree's character as to whether or not to stay in this universe or go back to her own. So how did you come up with this part of the story? And I think it's really key in bringing in like the emotional arc of Tree's character. How did you land on this, and how did you decide to flesh that out?
So one thing I knew when I was considering the idea of a sequel was that if I was going to make a second movie, that I really wanted it to be, I wanted to stay with Tree. And the only way that I could do that is if she had some sort of new emotional journey that she was going to go on. So that was critical. The idea for the second movie honestly happened when I was sitting in the editing room, and we were working on one of the scenes where Ryan, the roommate, barges into the room and says, "Hey, did you hit that fine vagina?" And I started laughing to myself, and I said to my editor, Greg Plotkin, on the first movie, I said, how funny would it be if he was the reason this all happened? And it kind of snowballed very quickly from there for me, in terms of like, I was like, well, they're on a university campus. This guy easily could be, a physics genius, in hiding. What if he's built something that caused all this? And then once I started to play with that idea, then it led me to the idea of moving between dimensions, because we're already playing with time travel. So I was like, why can't I play with interdimensional travel as well? And then once I had that component in place, then I landed on, okay, so if Tree ends up in a new dimension where things are different, then she's going to have to meet her mom. Because that's where the real heart and soul of the movie is, because she's sort of having to basically choose between her past and her future. But ultimately for me, and this is where stuff got really personal for me, when my dad passed away when I was 16 years old. And so that had a huge impact on me, especially creatively. And I think a lot of people who lose a parent at a young age spend their lives trying to sort out their feelings about that. And the conclusion that I came to a long time ago was that, as horrible and as painful as that event was for me, I also realized how much it shaped me. And I don't think I would be a filmmaker today had I not lost him. And so what I wanted to put into this movie, and granted, it's funny because these movies, they're fun and they're silly and they're meant to be a good time. And I also sort of feel like, and especially in horror, being sentimental and being emotional is typically frowned upon in the genre. But I just decided that I wasn't going to play by anyone's rule book in that regard, and I was going to lean into this because I thought there was a message in the movie that I thought was important, which was the bad things that happen to you are still the things that shape you, and you can't run away from them. And so that was the message in the movie for Tree, because a lot of people have said, well, she's so stupid, like why didn't she just stay, like her mom's there. And it cracks me up because I'm thinking, well, then you missed the point of the movie, because the whole point of the movie is that she has to embrace all the parts of herself, even the parts of herself that hurt, in order to be whole. And that was the journey of the second movie. The first movie was, I'm a bitch, and I'm a miserable person. And then she realizes, oh shit, how I treat other people matters. So that was kind of like the nice message of the first movie, that accountability is key. And that being kind to one another is important. And then in the second movie, obviously, I had this other theme. So I was very interested in trying to sort of elevate the story through character, and so that's why I ended up going on this whole, crazy, how I ended up in this whole crazy story. But I also knew, for me too, if I was gonna convince Jessica Roth to come back and be in a second movie, I was not going to just sort of say, hey, let's rehash, like let's just take you on it. No, I like, she is such a talented person, that it would be beneath her as an actor not to give her something real to do here. You know what I mean? And so, for better or for worse, and again, I've read a lot of reviews, and I've gotten a lot of flack for going in this direction, because people feel like I ditched the slasher movie elements too much, or I didn't make it scary enough, but again, for me, it was like, because everybody loves Jessica Roth and everybody wants her back. But my whole thing was to everyone, then I said, if you want her back, this is the only way you get to have her back, because the first movie is very closed-ended. There was no other way to make this movie hers without doing this. So you're either in or you're out.
Yeah. I was just going to say, I pretty much agree with what you said with, because watching the movie, I was thinking to myself, why wouldn't she just stay in this new reality with her mom? Maybe she could get a chance to get her boyfriend back.
Especially since he was cheating. He was being cheated on by Danielle.
But then I said to myself, that's not her world, though. She needs to go back where she was, and all these feelings that happened to her, they happened in that first world that she was in, and that's where I think she deserves to be and where she needs to be.
Right, yeah. I mean, that was why I feathered in all those scenes with her realizing that, like, there are all of these memories and experiences that she never had, because they weren't things that belonged to her. And Carter says it later in the movie that she's just living someone else's life that doesn't belong to her. And so again, that was key. I will say, if there's a silver lining to having kind of a crappy box office weekend, I have gotten lots and lots of messages. Our audience is predominantly young, and I've gotten a lot of messages from kids out there who lost a parent, and were really moved by this aspect of the story. And so that makes me feel really, really good. That has more value to me than any number. And so I think we're all, especially Jess, Jessica has an insanely close relationship with her mom. Her mom was on set quite a bit during both movies. And so this was a really personal movie for her as well. Because this was very much sort of a love letter to her mom. For all the mama's boys and people out there who have these close relationships with their parents, I really wanted the movie to resonate for them.
Yeah.
Great. It's good when you can make art that, even if it doesn't resonate to everybody, it resonates to a strong group of people.
Yeah, that's all you can do.
Yep.
Exactly. So we'll let you go, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us for this interview / discussion of the film. Rod could speak for himself, but for me, I loved this movie. I thought it was so well done. I thought the script was great. I loved how it embraced its tone. and I was just very thoroughly impressed with it. So
I really appreciate it.
I understand it might be a little disappointing with the box office numbers. I'm disappointed too, because I always want good movies that are good to do well. But I just want you to know I loved the movie, and I thought you did a fantastic job with it.
I really appreciate it, and I also appreciate chatting with you guys today. So thank you.
Yeah. And if you can't make the third one, I hope you get to work with Blumhouse again, because I think you guys are a good pair.
Yeah, I will for sure. That's not going to change. I really love Jason Blum and everybody that works at his company. They're great people, and I really look forward to whatever we do next.
That's awesome.
So, Happy Death Day 2U is in theaters currently. Go see the film, especially if you've seen the first one. And if you haven't seen the first one, watch the first one, and then go see the next one, like I did. You won't be disappointed. Chris Landon, thank you so much for joining us for this interview. I'm very excited to see what you do next with your career. Hopefully it's a Happy Death Day 3. But if not, I'm still very interested to see what you do next with your career. Thank you for joining us.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Yep.
Take care.